Hello there, future humans and fellow seekers. This is Nai Coach, and today I'm just going to be answering some questions that Glenn asked me. I'm going to try to fire them off pretty quick. I got done my main push for the day. I'm going to do this as a little change of pace, and then I'll go back in for a final push. All right, so Glenn says in a forum post, "Hey there, Coach, thanks for the video reply back. I was thinking of doing the same, but my webcam is giving me trouble. Otherwise, would have liked to have gone about things that way." Okay, that's great. I think it's important to be able to communicate in that way. In general, you want to be able to do that way in person and also written. You want to be able to do all of those comfortably because they all offer some unique advantages. And also, particularly in the case of going on camera like this, it builds an understanding of you as a person that you can't sometimes make that assessment. You can assess sometimes someone's intent and their character a bit better when you're able to view them. All right, let's see. You also couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed watching the video too, given that there's so much other stuff going on. It can almost seem like a distraction to get into the topic of soulmates. And but you say they can be worthwhile. Definitely, some of the more challenging things to do are worthwhile to do. And the subject of soulmates, to me, that goes, you can't talk about that and not talk about unconscious genius and the other and things of that nature. And so that's always very worthy discussion to have. You don't want to overwhelm. You always want your peaking journey to be the main overarching focus. But if you're doing that, the subject of one's muse, these other words we talked about, that will come up as a part of that for sure. Okay. Then you say, first degree stuff is fine with you. I do admit my mind isn't wired too well to learn that way, but I do understand that as a place in Pod Lair and how we're doing things right now. It's still nonetheless a bit of a weight that sometimes slows me down and makes it harder for me to get my work done, given I don't really like to approach anything from that way really, lower to higher gears. The thought of one's unconscious genius is really fascinating to me, and I want to develop a strong connection to your personal goddess as well. You wish you could talk about these kinds of things more, but I'm not sure how to proceed when the conversation gets too high level. It feels like there's some kind of weird roadblock that gets in the way, which sucks. It's quite an inconvenience. I suppose we'll have to put up for now. Hope it's not too long. All right, well, on that, I enjoy talking about all the degrees of Pod Lair, but I need to be able to put a standard of observational experience, which means the person is grounded. It's a subtle reality, but it is a subtle reality that's driving everything, the mojo phenomenon. So there has to be a grounding in some observational work. And that's such a critical thing that it needs to be separated out. There's a lot of things that become advantages in doing that firewall improper use of the higher degrees of Pod Lair practice. Now, I am willing to talk about those things, so I want to make sure that's understood. I do like still talking about that, and if a person wishes to discuss topics that are on that, then that's fine by me with this caveat that it's going to constantly touch back on the realities of that in the world and what certain givens are. So that's why I have it separated out like that, and that's why it's going first. But I'm not opposed to talking about those things. I plan to talk about those things in the probably months to come when I start doing more outreach stuff. Maybe I don't give a timetable on that. It'll be after we move, some months after that to take to get settled in. But I do plan on doing that. And I don't want to feel stifled either. So I think you want to take away as thinking of it as being stifled. I think a better way of thinking of it as it is like an anatomy course when talking about medicine. And there needs to be a grounding in that if we're going to be talking about things. For example, if you want to talk about what gender and sex is or isn't and so on and so forth, there needs to be a grounding in observable anatomy. because otherwise the higher level conversations that could be based on that get really distracting and pointless. So that's I want you to understand. So I want you to also take this on. I think it's a very good idea you take this on yourself as a way of being able to put your more speculative talk on something very strong, and that you can always revert to that when needed, and you're able to accept a challenge in that regard. Like, let's just talk about what's observable, not anything whiffy. Okay, you can do that. And you can challenge another person when the speculative conversation has veered to the point where you would just say, right, well, why don't we just go out down there where they have a Jaguar and look at it? Right? Let's just go out in the backyard and do the thing and see if the rocket goes higher or it doesn't. So there has to be, even if you're spending most of your time around, a fireplace, drinking cafe au lait or whatever, and having really philosophical talks about, the big things in life, which I love. So I'm not dismissing that. I like doing that. I'm not cafe au lait. I can't do caffeine. But point is, having yourself a nice little tasty, comforting beverage, sitting around talking with, good people, intelligent people who want to expand their minds. That's very satisfying. But there can be intrusions into the conversation from other people who want to talk with that aren't working with certain givens. Even though, say, everyone around that little fireplace, they're talking very abstract things, they're all probably grounded in some kind of physical discipline. However you want to take that, physical athletics, physical as in physics, but they're grounded in something that means they work very closely with reality. Touching it, moving it, having it move them, making guesses, trying things out, and then reality directly in some way pushes back. It could be an observational pushback, but there's no question what the answer is. Reality has said, I'm watching that person jump off that cliff, they said they could fly, they're not flying. And someone else can say, they had to lie to go against that. So there needs to be that grounding. Very often, you can have people who are like that they spend most of their time talking in a higher philosophical way, but there's no breaching of that. Because it could come from outside, it could come from within a group where people are actually having generally high-level conversations like that while respecting certain grounding elements. But if someone goes off the rails where they're taking too much ground that would be a problematic use, misuse, non-use of the grounding material, whatever that happens to be. So that it's just like, in a dojo, you can actually really enjoy talking about the philosophy of, say, Warrior's Way. Okay, but there has to be a mat somewhere, because conversations get really goofy in any school you go to. Whatever martial arts school you go to, it doesn't matter how awesome their philosophy is, if they don't have an area that you do some kind of full tilt sparring, goofiness will abound. Goofiness will abound. So there has to be that, and there has to be a comfortability of stepping into that whenever needed. And referring back to it, because as you're talking your philosophical talk, you're like, well, how would it actually work? And then you reference so-and-so and so-and-so last week doing such and such, and that's how it played out, and that's very similar to what we're talking about. Well, what about these other examples? And you can start actually citing examples of actual things relative to your philosophical talk. So that must be in play. So I'm not above higher level talk, but a person will have to be within that kind of discourse. You are at this time. But if, for example, there are other people that maybe want to discourse like this with me, but they are having a lot of trouble handling the grounding material. Like they can't see it, don't want to see it, freaking out from it, whatever. So talk about the higher stuff, that seems like a very logical and professional safeguard against that, and we can kind of say, like, can we agree to talk at least about this much in agreement? Can this be a given? And then if not, that needs to be a whole conversation. Is this a given? And if it is a given, what kind of given? What are the implications of the given? So that can be a conversation you might be having with a person through your whole life. Like they never move past that level. And that will keep yourself and myself from going, loopy, dealing with conversations that really can never have satisfying closure because one or more of the parties is not agreeing to the grounding elements of observable data. So I would think of it as an extra language, not a in the way language. I still refer to Nexia as my other, but I like being able to refer to her as unconscious genius. I like to be able to refer to those who have her mojo in the world, Nijai, by their observable palate alone. The large receptive eyes, diffuse, the emoting goes in the cheek, the inward rolling of the lips. I can just point that out. And I can talk in that language fluently because that may be the conversation I'm having with certain people. And it's definitely going to be a step that's always there at the beginning to ground people, to give them confidence in what you're talking about. And generally when things get goofy, it has to do with the grounding elements. Well, it has to do with, fifth gear and quasi-state and so on not being where it needs to be. And the way you do that is you confront grounding elements on the mat of life, observable existence. That's how you come to terms. But you'll never come to terms with your sprawl isn't what it needs to be, where sprawl is very important, unless you get in the mat and get taken down a bunch of times, realize, oh, I have to do that. Yes, you have to do that and find a way to be successful at that because that's going to come up. So I put this as a very important language, dialect within all of Podlair research, Podlair project, and it's the first one. It's the one that non-Podlair people will need to speak first. I really, one, taking speculation out, and also wording is another one. The first degree, besides being observational, all the words are generally new words, der sub, right? Instead of Jez Hunter. Jez is okay, but the hunter thing, who's a hunter? And don't Zevi hunt a lot? And it just gets all goofy, and next thing you know, we're debating about language instead of the most important discovery ever. So let's keep the eye on the prize and just talk about words that don't have any other kind of connotations as much as possible, and then the aesthetic pointing out using language that is as close as you can get to just a neutral observation, such as their eyes look larger. It's a subtle thing, but their eyes also look like they're drinking in rather than pushing. Humans have noted that many times. So-and-so has piercing eyes. So-and-so has drinking eyes. Okay, that's been around for a very long time. Now, being able to say what the fine points are is another matter. But that language is a language that anyone can speak. It doesn't have any problems in that you are adding speculation on that they may not agree to, or that you are infusing it with some kind of poetic wording outside the aesthetic observation. Sometimes aesthetic observations does just have slightly poetic wording, like dancing eyes, laser eyes, but it's really trying to touch directly to something that can be viewed. So anyway, that language I think is going to give you more confidence in everything else, because all the stuff you want to talk about is going to, well, not by me, but by anyone else, it's going to be challenged. And then by myself, I have more confidence in anyone who is working with the material. So that's kind of my criteria. If they are working with the material and they're able to go forward, at least to, I would say, like the conclusion of the first degree, where there's something under the hood that's driving this, because people who look like this keep showing up in soccer and ski jumping and whatever. So, and the look on their face and their certain kind of predictable interests, those stay. Child, adult, older. Okay, so if we're talking about that, then we're talking about some sort of crazy matrix level phenomenon that's driving everything. And specifics, that's more speculative of like how exactly does human design work. But the idea that there is one. There is one, there's 16 different things, and they show up in these various places. With that being a given, then I'm cool talking with whatever. And even people that I will speak with in the future, they may want to talk with me like that, and I may be willing to do that. But I'm going to keep referencing the fact that we're talking about upper level medical human body questions, for example, as an analogy, and the person I'm speaking to doesn't seem to understand anatomy. But they seem like a nice person, they seem smart and so forth, and they're trying to do good. And so I will discuss if it's worthwhile to me, I will still discuss those things. But that's going to be a firm Z-Vi bar. And a clear and distinct assertion package and linguistic package. All right, so what else? Shamanism sounds cool. I haven't heard this term in a while. Yeah, I was feeling a little cramped. I could feel people wigging out before the pod layer fallout. So there's some things that I'm very happy to be bringing back in because it's more my natural way, and I don't have to really worry about people wigging out because I'm just going to do what I'm going to do to get things forward. And if people wig out, then they're modern humans. If they can handle it, they're future humans, and no hard feelings for anyone. But that just will be an efficient way to roll. I found on Google, given their colorful, but you like the images that you found on Google because they're colorful, magical, transcendental in nature. You don't believe you've ever had a shamanic experience. Well, that's not true. But I'm sure they are the bee's knees. They are. Well, for certain people they are. For Naiji, they tend to be. But for everyone, the new upgraded take on your existence that you get after having them, definitely bee's knees. You wonder how they compare to all the other experiences that you've had at Pod Lair, especially post-Fallout. Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but I'll just touch on the fact that you have had shamanic experiences. There's a lot to the whole shamanic thing. I used to read that kind of stuff. I haven't in years, but I've internalized the general principles. Shamanic traditions generally showed up all around the world from primitive cultures where you have animism, the belief that there's spirits and everything. And then different cultures have different views on that, but that part is similar. The landscape, the weather, the people, the dead people, this and that, they have spirits. And some people are better attuned to talking at them, and they often are seen to be predisposed to a shamanic path. But everyone has shamanic experiences, because the shaman generally goes away from the tribe, doesn't have to, but it's pretty common. And then they get more into usually two kind of traditions. One is seeing and one is healing. So the seer and the healer are under the shaman. And people in the tribe go to them and they stay away from the people so they're able to do things that other people can't. That can be, for example, seeing things people can't. It's hard to do that when you have the riotous thoughts of the tribe around you. And the same thing with healing is it is easier to get into a healing zone when you can purify yourself, often is a big part of the healing process. Okay, so for the shaman, full time they do that, which is what? Basically quasi-death. That's the main thing. You're going to go through sort of one you may be more familiar with is the sort of worldview death and rebirth. It can also be more of a sense of self-death rebirth, which tends to go more with the healing tradition. But either way, there's going to be a death and a rebirth of a new you. And what kind of makes it shamanic is a few elements, all of which you definitely had a lot of these experiences. One, you're giving yourself over to nature. That's a common element of it. Often there's a psychedelic element, and this can come from and so by the way, you give yourself over to the data when you do all your collaging and quizzing and the purifications that have come out and you've ridden those waves. All that qualifies as a kind of quasi-death. But then there's also a psychedelic element where you kind of try to stretch your psyche, soul, being, whatever, so it's more elastic and thus can take on what is happening better. That very much happens in the trance states that happen when you do moja reading, collaging, all that stuff. All that stuff counts as that. And other people do like shrooms or the sacred herb, or they spin around whirling dervish style just to get dizzy. You can do fasting. Different things will make you start getting a little spacey, and that helps to get higher truths that would normally break you. It expands and makes you liquidy. What else? So nature is going to kind of update / correct you, make you what you should be. Psychedelic loosening experience, and then the quasi-death is the purpose of it. So shaman tend to do that, as religious people do in general, for people on their birthdays, deaths, weddings, the commencement of a auspicious project, military campaign, a school campaign, whatever. And that's because there's going to be a shamanic experience. Often, though, the shaman is overseeing it. So the wedding couple is having a shamanic experience. They're having a death of their unmarried self into their birth as the married couple. They are a new entity, and the shaman will preside over this ritual. But if you're talking shamanic experience, which you can have not being a shaman, then yes. Then there are degrees. There are people that just do that. They just go to the major shamanic ones, but you have to. If you don't, you'll be less developed. There's your puberty, coming of age thing, your later, I can actually be a full citizen member of the tribe, I'm married, someone I loved has died, I'm going to a funeral. There needs to be rituals for this because nature, right? Someone has died, you fell in love, whatever it is, nature, the physics of nature and how it applies to human condition are upon you in some way that's going to cause a quasi-death. It can even be a very pleasant one, but it's going to force that to happen, and so the shaman guides it through. But then there are people, I'd say another kind of degree over, they're still not shaman, but they're shamanic experience enthusiasts. They enjoy the experience. And so they will actually seek out shamanic experiences for things more than those major ones. Anytime that they may just feel uneasy or unsure or bored or just lack of a drive or purpose somewhere, anything like that, they will kind of go to that. They're like early shrinks in a way. Well, shrink / life coach / I don't understand what's going on. I need an outside, bigger perspective that's going to pop me out of this being I am now. There are those that do them on the you don't have a choice. If someone dies, you're going to be going through that experience of grief. You have to. But then there are those who are like, that was helpful. That shamanic experience helped me, so they seek them out. Then another degree over, what I'd say part-time shaman. They're people who not only enjoy doing that experience, they like to organize it. They like to do rituals. They like to even lead those sometimes or do them without a shaman being there. They're going to self-guide themselves through things, but they're going to choose shamanic experience and do it where they are either unguided or they are the guide for others in some way. You don't have to do that all the time, and it's not uncommon for part-time shaman to live in the town, or at least live in the town part of the time. Then you have full-time shaman that usually live outside of the town, so they can actually do these things they want to do all the time, and some of them might get more gnarly, and they don't want the tribe around while they're having their quasi-deaths. But if you are going into nature to become a new, better, further along you, on purpose, and you're ritualizing it and you're having a quasi-death and it gets a little trippy, that's a shamanic experience. And you're at least a part-time shaman because you're doing a lot of these things unguided. You're guiding yourself. I'm guiding you on some of them, but then you're actually going on doing more work on your own as your own shaman for yourself. A lot of part-time shaman are shaman for themselves. Or a few friends. They generally don't take on the responsibility of, if there's a question on something, the whole tribe can come to them. Usually that's a full-time shaman, so like, okay, although yes, specialty shamans, so like some do weather, some do, love matches, whatever it is, they do those kinds of things. And if anyone in the town has a question on that, you can come to me pretty much 24/7. If I'm asleep, just tacking on my door, I'll look at it tomorrow. So that's a kind of full-time shaman. But you, I would say, have had many shamanic experiences, and you probably would be considered like a part-time shaman. You part-time or amateur or whatever it is. Maybe amateur is the wrong word, but yeah, I say part-time, intermittent. So you kind of, and then you have like mixtures as well. You have, shaman that live in the town a lot of the time, but then during certain times of the year, they feel particularly auspicious to get in touch with nature. They go out and act like a full-time shaman for a period of time, a week, 3 months, whatever it is, a season. And they kind of get their pilgrimage on or their meditation on or whatever to kind of boost up this shamanic experience pathway that they're on. All right, what else? And there is no right way other than everyone's having shamanic experiences. It's just a question of how frequent they were and how guided they were. Let's see, or how well guided they were. You're not quite sure, but you have feelings of anxiousness when trying to find too much in worldly ways of it having this or that. I think it is the soulmate. My other likes it being a bit more open-ended, but I'm not so sure if that helps at all. In fact, it may even make things more complicated, but complexity is not necessarily bad. No, it's good. And yeah, that's just because there's so many ways your relationship with your unconscious genius, soulmate could play out. So you want to give that plenty of room. Perhaps it is a rift that's different than you thought. Perhaps it is going to be based off of a campaign or something that you're doing with your life that you didn't know that you were going to be going so strong in that direction. It could even be that perhaps you're going to have relationships that are precursors to your soulmate, and they are necessary precursors. But maybe you do or don't know that at the time. So things like that. It definitely helps to keep it open-ended. All right. Normally, the term is used to describe a human being who is this for an individual, but I also like the idea of being one's own soulmate to complete oneself with one's unconscious genius. Again, for the Ab-Initio. Yeah, for sure. And actually, it's going to bonus stack you for interacting with them in the world. Because, well, a variety of reasons. One is that you're going to have more mat time, more dance time with your unconscious genius, your other, than any human. So that's the dance that will always be the one you know the most of. So the more you know of that, it will trickle down to everything else. Everything else will get a taste of how well you do that with your other. And there's just no other person that will be with you that much. Your other was with you before you met whoever your soulmate is. They'll be there through all your soulmate, through there if your soulmate actually and you and I part, maybe it wasn't a soulmate, maybe it's a tragedy, whatever. But your other will always be there. And even when you're with your soulmate, you'll sleep at some point. You'll actually think about other thoughts. But when you're doing that, your other, your unconscious genius is always with you. So you want to make sure the score that's very high, because that will play out onto your character sheet in a radial fashion, including big time your soulmate. What else? Well, your other has much greater potentiality of expression than any physical form. Because your other is not a physical form, it can actually project itself onto all the Niji female you've ever seen and be any abstraction of any of those in any combinations. So, one, that gives you a lot to train and work with to grow yourself in that kind of conversation, but also it may suggest positive lines of inquiry or approach, or warn against potential negative ones that your real life person in no way exhibits. Either signals are very subtle, or sometimes there's no visible signals. However, since your other has such a wide range of riffs it can play with and be and temporary this and that and jump around, you can actually go, ooh, I noticed that my other keeps doing these certain kinds of things and we have a good interaction that way. I'm going to try that. You'll find if you try that with a person, you'll get a lot of good instinctual things to try out that may seem like they're out of nowhere. But you've watched enough Niji to know that this can be something that can be helpful. It doesn't mean you push hard, because your soulmate's going to be an individual person. So whatever they are, they are. Whatever their tastes and wants and interests and preferences are, they are. Other than being Niji, that's just probably genetic. But you put it forward, but it gives you ideas. It gives you a lot of ideas to try out that you wouldn't just looking at the person that's in front of you. That's big. And then I'd say a third reason. A third reason is the authority. Because even your soulmate, you might break up with them, or if you don't break up with them, you maybe don't speak with them for a period of time because you got really upset with each other and you just couldn't really agree on it, and you love the person, but you also really disagree on certain things. So it's making for an awkwardness. Even for your soulmate, there can be still a resistance to what you need to do as the other part of that. You can make rationalizations how your soulmate should be doing things, whatever, that may not be true. But you can feel like it's true when dealing with a real person. You can kind of look at them and say, oh, their behavior was this or that, and therefore I'm in the right, they need to adjust, they need to change. But with your other, it's constant. That's one thing I mentioned, but not just constant, it has the power of your simulator. One thing Glenn, with the simulator is that it's very powerful and engrossing in just a way that is beyond words to describe. But there's something that goes along with that. The prediction power, all those cool things that comes with it. The compelling drama, the truth of it. Well, there you go. That's where it all comes from. And so You can, right, if they give you a vision, you can shake your spirits off. And they'll give you a new version of truth, a new angle on truth. They're not changing truth. You can shake them off and then go play videos of certain kinds of things to stimulate certain kinds of visions and rides in your simulator. Fine, but they won't give you what you want if it's avoiding something that you need to be doing. You can do that with a real life person. It is very hard to do that with your actual other because they're there all the time, but also they can keep sending you troubling visions that you have to deal with, where actually another person, if you could rationalize, if you love them, but you can rationalize, I think they're wrong here. You can, in your conscious mind, be like, I'm done with that. They have to come to me. But you do that with your other, and your other just keeps tripping you up with all kinds of visions where you're not feeling good about it. And you're like, but I want to feel good, but you can't get the visions to be in such a way in the simulator that you feel good about it. And you'll have to wrestle with it. And when you do, you'll level up, and it'll directly help you with your soulmate. So you get levels up for your soulmate that you might not be able to get directly with the real life person. So there are obvious benefits to a real life human being, but there are limitations. And but by having that strong connection to both, you don't get, you don't miss out on anything, and you bonus stack both of them. What else? Your line of inquiry is wanting to learn more about the soulmate, but also how to attract someone who has these qualities as well. Okay, so you want to know about the general process, but also how to find and attract. Okay, what is it? How do you find it? How do you get it to be attracted to you? And then how do you do that well? All right. You've mentioned in the past me that coffee shops is a place to find Nijai. Yes, if they're indie, not their chain. But I was also wondering what your thoughts were about college and university locations, as well as any other areas that might be places to look out for in the real world or online. Well, without going into individual cases, I can give you some trends because I'm still working on things to get to data bedrock, so that's going to take me a while, and I want to hold off being specific, but I can give you trends that will be helpful. Well, online, there's the ASMR community. There's more females than men, much more females. And of the females, it is overwhelmingly, not all, there are definitely some cases, but overwhelmingly it's romantics or rom. And the Nijai is in there. It tends to be the Duram more, but the Nijai also gets into that mix. What else? Oh. This is online. This is I gotta get going, but this is my takeaway for you because this will help you online and at colleges. Is when I went into the book reader vloggers, the ones that read lots of books and they talk about them, particularly fantasy authors, and people who like fantasy books and like to talk about them. Overwhelmingly Nijai. It's Nijai and Naiji, but the Naiji are much fewer. So any of those female vloggers that are talking about books, high probability that it is a Nijai fantasy books, talking about fantasy books. So on that, I would, at college, if you have the time to spare, I would check out taking a creative writing course. Creative writing or poetry is going to have a high chance of having Nijai in there. And for yourself, you like to write. You can be a prolific writer, and you express yourself well in that way. That can be a really great way because those kinds of riffs of Nijai, besides that's an area that in college and online, I know where they are to a good degree. They tend to respond to writing. They are moved by writing, and they like writing as a nice kind of precursor to getting to know someone more. I think that might be good for you as well, because you can sort of take the time to put it forward in a way that sometimes can be a little charged when you're there in person with them. Writing is very, very helpful, but not everyone likes to get writing. You're in luck here because Nijai in general, but particularly this riff, I think would be a good one for you to find, won't be too challenging. They actually respond to that. They consider it to be a sign of intelligence, a sign of patience, of generosity, of soulfulness. You get a lot of good props for being able to express yourself in writing and reading, understanding. Reading what they write, ingesting it, and writing back intelligently with soul and with your individual character, things like that. So, yep, that's my takeaway on that. Yeah, I guess basically it. All right, back to it. My next push. Bye-bye.